Senator Chris Van Hollen just delivered one of the most devastating indictments of the Trump administration's foreign policy you will ever hear. He had 5 minutes. He used them. The war against Iran has killed 14 American service members, wounded hundreds more, and killed thousands of civilians. Gas prices, food prices, everything is up. Trump called high gas prices peanuts and said, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation."
Trump obviously doesn't care. He called high gas prices peanuts and said, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation." That's from the President of the United States.
91 days ago, he said we had won the war. He said Iran's enrichment facilities were completely and totally obliterated. Was that false? Rubio did not answer.
And all for what? The President told us 91 days ago that we had, quote, won the war in Iran. Last year, he told the country Iran's key enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Was that false?
Van Hollen then ran through the list, flattering Putin while abandoning Ukraine, lifting chip restrictions for China, getting nothing, Elon Musk taking a chainsaw to aid, enabling an Ebola outbreak, corrupt crypto deals with the UAE, extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, threatening to invade Greenland, weakening NATO, a race-based refugee system where white South Africans get 99% of record-low slots. Cuba designated a state sponsor of terror with no new evidence. Then reports that the U.S. is working with Israel to take away Jordan's custodianship of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Rubio said he'd never heard of it. He did not deny it. 14 dead. A president who doesn't think about you. That is not a foreign policy. That is a dumpster fire. Let's watch.
Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary. This is your first public hearing since President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu launched an illegal war against Iran. Netanyahu said he's been waiting 40 years to do this. Turns out he finally found a president who was both stupid and reckless enough to join him. The war has killed 14 American service members, wounded hundreds more, and killed thousands of civilians. It's driving up the price of gas, food, and much more. Trump obviously doesn't care. He called high gas prices peanuts and said, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation." That's from the President of the United States. And all for what? The President told us 91 days ago that we had, quote, won the war in Iran. Last year, he told the country Iran's key enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Was that false? Let's face it, Mr. Secretary, the Trump foreign policy has become a dumpster fire. This is the same president who's more interested in flattering Vladimir Putin than in protecting Ukrainian sovereignty. The president who lifted restrictions on the transfer of sophisticated U.S. chips to China, but came back from his trip there with nothing but ballroom envy. He tweeted about that the other day. This is the president who brought on Elon Musk to take a chainsaw to AID, which has enabled the current Ebola outbreak in the DRC. We've also witnessed corrupt crypto deals with the UAE royal family that have enriched the Trump family at the expense of our national security. We've seen an administration engage in extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, hijack Venezuelan oil, threaten to invade Greenland, and weaken the NATO alliance. Here at home, a Reagan-appointed judge said that you and former Secretary Noem abused your powers when you locked up and still seek to deport students for protesting the destruction of Gaza. The Reagan-appointed judge said you did that, quote, primarily on account of their First Amendment-protected political speech. Speaking of Gaza, the so-called Board of Peace seems to have run around. Meanwhile, while Senator Rubio once proclaimed that the U.S. must, quote, work to ensure that refugees who flee war, torture, and persecution are provided safe environments to live and thrive in. Now, as Secretary of State in this administration, you have capped refugees at a record low of 17,500, and white South Africans, Afrikaners, have comprised roughly 99% of those slots, Mr. Secretary. A race-based refugee system. At the same time, the president's preventing Cuban political refugees from entering the United States, even as you've imposed a near oil blockade on that repressive regime. The stated goal is to change the government there, but the only real change is humanitarian crisis inflicted on millions of people, not members of the regime. And in that regard, Mr. Secretary, I have a question for you regarding the designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism. On the very first week, at least, of this administration, the administration reinstated that. And in a recent January 26 EO, you made statements suggesting connections to Hezbollah and Hamas. The previous administration did a thorough review with the intelligence community and concluded that there was no evidence that Cuba was engaged in ongoing state sponsor of terrorism. Did you find new evidence to support that conclusion?
Well, first of all, let me just say that's your question, but you made this long statement of which I disagree with most of it. We won't have time to address every point that you made. So let's stick to Cuba specific, because that's the question that you asked. Cuba has sponsored terrorism, and it's been supported groups. For example, virtually every left-wing, radical, violent terrorist group in the Western Hemisphere has at some point relied on support from Cuba. The ELN, the FARC dissidents, including them, have been involved there. We also know, for example, that Cuba continues to host a pretty substantial collection intelligence sites on behalf of the Chinese and the Russians. But you look at the region and you look at all of these leftist Marxist terrorist organizations, all of them, in many cases, got their seed money from the Cubans. Mr. Secretary, if I can move on.
I noticed you did not answer my question, because my question specifically related to whether there was new evidence to support that conclusion. I can just tell you—
Why would I need new evidence?
Because you're claiming that they're a state sponsor of terrorism, suggesting they're ongoingly involved in that. My final question to you, Mr. Secretary, relates to the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. There have been reports that the United States is working with Israel to take away the Kingdom of Jordan's custodianship over the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in East Jerusalem. Can you confirm today that there's no truth?
I'm not even aware of those reports.
There are reports, so I was hoping you could confirm.
Is that like a media report, or?
There have been several media reports. Yes.
Well, you know the media is always accurate.
No, they're not, and that's why I'm getting—
Yeah, no, I've never even heard that. That's the first time I even hear anybody discuss that.
All right, well, I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Secretary.
But we have a great relationship with Jordan, you know, and we're very helpful. I've just never heard that before. You should— I don't know what article you're referring to. Just give it to me. I'll look at it.
I'm happy to.
Is it a credible website?
I'm glad to hear you say, Mr. Secretary, there's no truth to it.
I've never heard that discussed by anybody.
This hearing is a masterclass in how to use a limited amount of time to maximum effect. Senator Chris Van Hollen had 5 minutes. He used them to deliver a comprehensive indictment of the Trump administration's foreign policy, then asked Secretary of State Marco Rubio 2 specific questions. Rubio could not answer either of them. Van Hollen began with the war against Iran. 14 American service members dead, hundreds wounded, thousands of civilians killed, gas prices, food prices, everything up. And Trump's response? He called high gas prices peanuts. He said, "I don't think about Americans' financial situation." The President of the United States said he does not think about whether Americans can afford to fill their tanks or feed their families. Van Hollen let that hang in the air. Then he asked, "Trump told us 91 days ago that we had won the war. He said Iran's key enrichment facilities were completely and totally obliterated. Was that false?" Rubio did not answer. He could not answer. Because the answer is yes. It was false. The war is not won. The facilities are not obliterated. American service members are still dying. And the president is tweeting about ballrooms. Van Hollen then ran through a greatest hits list of administration failures: flattering Putin while Ukraine burns, lifting chip restrictions for China and getting nothing in return, Elon Musk taking a chainsaw to aid, enabling an Ebola outbreak, corrupt crypto deals with the UAE royal family, extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean, hijacking Venezuelan oil, threatening to invade Greenland, weakening NATO. Each item is a paragraph in a book that no one would believe is nonfiction, and Van Hollen delivered them in under 2 minutes. Then he turned to the refugee system. Rubio once said the U.S. must provide safe environments for refugees fleeing war and persecution. Now, as Secretary of State, He has capped refugees at 17,500, a record low. And white South Africans, Afrikaners, have comprised roughly 99% of those slots. Van Hollen called it what it is, a race-based refugee system. At the same time, Cuban political refugees are being blocked, even as the administration imposes a near-oil blockade on Cuba. The stated goal is regime change. The actual result is a humanitarian crisis inflicted on millions of ordinary Cubans. Van Hollen then asked Rubio about Cuba's designation as a state sponsor of terrorism. The previous administration did a thorough review with the intelligence community. They concluded there was no evidence of ongoing state sponsorship. Did Rubio find new evidence? Rubio did not answer. He said Cuba has sponsored terrorism in the past. He listed left-wing terrorist groups. He talked about intelligence sites for China and Russia. He did not say whether there is new evidence of ongoing sponsorship. Van Hollen called him out. "I noticed you did not answer my question." Rubio's response was remarkable. "Why would I need new evidence?" "Because you are claiming ongoing activity. That requires current evidence, not history, not what Cuba did in the 1980s, what Cuba is doing now." Rubio either does not understand the distinction or is pretending not to. Finally, Van Hollen asked about the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex. There have been reports that the United States is working with Israel to take away Jordan's custodianship over the holy site in East Jerusalem. Van Hollen asked Rubio to confirm there is no truth to those reports. Rubio said he had never even heard of them. He asked if the reports were from the media. He said the media is not always accurate. He asked if the website was credible. He never said the reports were false. He never said the United States is not working with Israel to strip Jordan of its custodianship. He just said he had not heard it. That is not a denial. That is an evasion. Van Hollen's closing line was gracious. "I'm glad to hear you say there's no truth to it, Mr. Secretary." But Rubio had not said that. He had said he had not heard it. Those are different things. Van Hollen gave him an out. Rubio did not take it. The underlying issue here is trust. The administration has lied about the war in Iran. It has lied about the refugee system. It has lied about Cuba. It has engaged in corrupt deals, extrajudicial killings, and attacks on First Amendment rights. Why should anyone believe anything they say? Van Hollen did not need to prove each allegation in 5 minutes. He just needed to establish a pattern. And he did. 14 dead. Gas prices through the roof. A president who does not think about Americans' financial situation. A race-based refugee system. A state sponsor of terrorism designation with no new evidence. Reports of a plot against Jordan's custodianship that the Secretary of State has never heard of. That is not a foreign policy. That is a dumpster fire. And Van Hollen held up a mirror.